So Brittany, why are you running for the seat of Keppel?
Well, I grew up here and I love living here. I'm raising my family here now, and I've always been passionate about a better future for our kids and to grow jobs in our local economy. And so that's why I ran in 2015, in the 2015 state election. And at that point, there was a lot of public debate about public ownership of assets. The Newman government was talking about selling assets. They'd also done a lot of damage to our public service. They sacked 197 people from the hospital and health service. And so I was really passionate about our future. So I ran in 2015. I ran again in 2017 and 2020. And I'm really happy with what we've been able to achieve in that time, but my job's not done. And I've got more that I still need to do. And so I'm running again in 2024 because I've got unfinished business that I need to make sure that it's done. And that's why I'm running.
There's a lot of growth coming, and there's all these scary reports that come out sometimes saying, Yeppoon, the Capricorn Coast is going to grow another 55% supposedly in the next 7 years. How do you think that we should plan to deal with that growth? Or what are you doing to I guess, being in the seat, what are you doing to deal with that growth?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I was a town planner before I got into Parliament, so this is right in my wheelhouse. I'm very passionate about people having a good, solid community to live in that has access to housing, good social infrastructure as well, making sure that we've got the footpaths, the roads, the playgrounds, the places where people can actually live a happy life and have a good quality lifestyle. So planning for that is really important. We have had over 130,000 people move to Queensland since 2020. So in the last 4 years alone, we've had a town the size of Rockhampton and Gladstone effectively move to the state. And that's put an awful lot of pressure on housing, our hospitals, our schools, our roads, pretty much everything. And you can even tell around town it's a lot busier, certainly in Yeppoon and even Rocky, than what it was even 4 years ago. So making sure that we've got adequate housing supply is really important because I strongly believe in the need for everyone to have a safe roof over their head. And we're seeing the housing market really challenged at the moment. About 95% of the housing market is private rentals. 95% of the private rental market, or the rental market, is private rentals. So expanding and opening up land to increase the supply, because what we've got at the moment is a supply and demand issue. It's very high demand and supply is really stuck. So unlocking more land, building the infrastructure to unlock that land as well, and that's something that I've been working with Livingston Shire and Rocky Council on for years. Making sure that we've got the roads, the sewage, that trunk infrastructure is really critical. But also with our government services like our hospital, we are seeing a huge surge in demand, particularly in our emergency departments. But one thing that I'm really passionate about too is making sure that government agencies that determine future service delivery and service need also look at not only the resident population but also the tourist population. If you just look at towns like Yeppoon in terms of the resident population, then I don't think you're adequately accounting for what the general population is, especially in the high tourist seasons. So when it comes to the hospital, the fire, the police, you add all these extra tourists in and that puts an extra demand. I mean, a heart attack doesn't decide whether you have it on a holiday in Yeppoon or back home in Ballarat. So what we're seeing is a surge in demand, especially in our tourist season, but also because of interstate migration.
Interesting. That's a good point, because I think quickly on the immigration thing, I think people like to blame a federal government for their immigration policy because they're kind of in charge of the borders. Mm-hmm. But it's probably a good point that it's interstate immigration, and I'd have to pull up the stats to look at what's actually higher. I don't know if you know, but the number of people moving to Queensland internationally or coming through in that international immigration element versus interstate immigration, it's probably a good point for people to look up. So if you're watching this, look that up, or I'll put a stat on the screen or something, just to sort of try and differentiate that, because I think otherwise, we like to it's easy to criticise federal policy versus, keeping that in mind, I think is important.
For sure. That 130,000 that is directly interstate migration, so that's not even accounting for international migration to Queensland as well.
I didn't realise it was that high. And as well as the fact that Yeppoon has always been a touristy town, but it's also, or the Capricorn Coast for that matter, because Keppel consists of sort of not just Yeppoon, but in terms of that destination element through government spending and through sort of COVID and all those things has become a much more of a destination. Government spending meaning RTOs, helping promote the region, and tourism operators and small businesses doing their bit. It's definitely become more of a hub for that tourism element. So again, I don't know what percentage of our population would be transient in that sense of. But at Christmas time, I'm sure it would be as high as it is ever, and then the hospital will cop extra traffic because of it.
Absolutely. It was one of the fights that I had to have just, for example, with the Yeppoon Fire Station. So it was only manned 5 days a week during the daylight hours, during business hours, with fully qualified firefighters. Outside of those times, it was staffed with auxiliary firefighters, which do a great job. They aren't fully qualified firefighters. And when we were looking at the data with respect of the different fire stations that needed upgrading to be 7-day manned by firefighters, Yeppoon didn't come up because of the resident population, but when we added in the tourist population as well, it was over and above what we needed, what the threshold was for a 7-day manned station. So I had to make that argument. Airlie Beach has got the same problem as well. So it's something that I come up against often, but making sure that the decision makers and the people who are making decisions or offering advice about where to build services or upgrade services know just how important it is to have those services delivered with our full population in mind.
Yeah, that's a good thought. What do you think an MP's job is? I feel like that's a good question.
Yeah, it's very diverse. I've been doing this job now for almost 10 years, and every day is different. Some days you're busy working with constituent issues, one-on-one with constituents who, come into the office or write an email about something that they need assistance with. There's often media interviews to be done, really communicating with the electorate about issues or investment, having conversations about future planning. Then there's Parliament as well, which is about 15 to 17 weeks a year. So I usually fly down on a Monday morning and then get back on the Friday. They're very big weeks. I try and do as much as I can while I'm in Parliament, because I really do believe in the importance of knocking on the door of the minister and eyeballing them and talking to them face to face about, issues that are happening or things that I think need to be advocated for. So I am just literally back to back during sitting weeks where I'm in the chamber, I'm out of the chamber, I'm in ministerial meetings, meeting with stakeholders, trying to solve issues. And that is the most effective way of getting things done, is really when I'm in Brisbane, fighting hard for us up here. So it is a very diverse job, but I love it, and getting wins on the board is, that's what I love about this job.
And is that what do you think voters are looking for when they're looking for someone to deliver in that role?
I think it's important for someone who listens. I've always given a guarantee to constituents that I would meet with them and listen to them, even if it's something that we don't necessarily agree on. You can actually really get a better appreciation for how someone feels about an issue by understanding their perspective and listening to them. There have been times where I've said to constituents, I'm sorry, but I don't agree with you. We'll have to agree to disagree. And they're fine with that because they've been heard. So listening as an MP is incredibly important, and really putting yourself in someone else's shoes as well. Something that might seem trivial to someone else, when someone walks into my office and, they're desperate for assistance or for someone to hear them, it's really important that you take that time to listen about what their experience is at that time. And then ACT. I had a constituent whose hot water system was broken. And, some people might say, oh, it's so trivial. But to that man, he was a pensioner, he'd saved up for this hot water system, the company wasn't honouring their warranty. I spent a lot of time helping him, but purely because he wasn't having hot showers overnight. And he was a pensioner, he'd worked all his life and he wanted to get his hot water system fixed. So some people might say that's not necessarily an MP's job, but for that man in Coongal, John, he really needed some help and he had been everywhere else, no one else had really offered, and at the end of the day, we still haven't been able to get that fixed. Even though I've offered to just give him a new hot water system, the company is still not budging, but they're the kinds of things that I like advocating for.
What about the fact that the reality that you just can't help everyone as well? Like that must be a difficult part of the job? It
is, but I don't feel like I've let anything slip through the cracks yet, touch wood. That everyone who's been to see me or contacted me, I've tried. Sometimes you can't help, but I can at least say that I've tried.
Sure. I think that probably touches on, for me, what I think people have a lot of the time, which is unreasonable expectations of leaders, whether it's at a local council level or a state level or a federal level. People often talk in all these different ways and they're like, oh, why don't you get involved and run for a seat? Because they talk like they could do it much better, talk about how much they could do it better. And I think, what do you think that, people, I guess, what I'm trying to touch on here is there's so many things that are in your control and that you can do, but also there's so many, like the state government, I don't know how many employees they have, but it's a large entity in a sense. And so how much of the things that do happen or don't happen, I guess, even if you want them to, are affected by the organisational side of the government, because it's people, with in planning roles within the state government who are sort of doing, you can't do everything. Obviously, you're one person, you're representing the people of Keppel, but how much... am I kind of explaining this right? How much, because there's an organisational side as well as a elected side as well?
Yes, that's a great question too. So firstly, with respect of government, I have always believed of the importance of building relationships, so that when you actually need some help or some assistance for a constituent, that you know who to pick up the phone to and that they're also willing to help you because you've built that relationship and that rapport with them. So I have done that over many years and feel like I actually have a pretty good network of not only other members of parliament and ministers, but also within government, people that I know I can call on to solve problems for me and for our community. Other MPs have a different perspective. They tend to argue and fight for things. I'm more of the view that you form those relationships and people are more like, you catch more flies with honey. Also, I've been working on a sort of grassroots project for about 10 years where in Parliament each sitting week they have new public servants that come in for like an induction course about how Parliament works. There's usually about 100 to 200 of them and they work across all the departments, often from regional Queensland, but more often than not metro-based public servants in Department of Treasury, in the fire department, in police, in state development, infrastructure, all of the departments. And so I sort of fell into it about 10 years ago where I've been going and presenting to these seminars each sitting week about what it's like to be a Member of Parliament. And one thing that I really stress to them is regional Queensland matters, and that if you haven't been out into regional Queensland, you should definitely come and meet with us, because you as public servants are often making decisions about regional Queensland, and if you don't know it, if you don't really understand the issues, then it's very hard for them to make decisions in the best interests of our communities. So I've had a lot of really great feedback from that. I mean, over 10 years, hundreds of public servants have been through that seminar where I've really stressed the importance of coming out to regional Queensland and engaging. And I actually believe that it's resulted in better outcomes for us because they are thinking about that every day when they're making decisions or providing advice about what happens in our areas.
Interesting. Yeah, and is it offensive to call it the bureaucratic arm of the government? Is that offensive? I don't know.
It's the public service.
Okay.
People join the public service because they're passionate about serving the community, and
Sure.
In some cases, a lot of public servants have not necessarily been north of, say, Gympie, so they don't understand, when we talk about the Bruce Highway or the importance of our hospitals or how far you have to travel. The tyranny of distance is a big thing in Queensland, and making sure that people who make decisions about regional Queensland understand what it's like for us.
Interesting. So I guess what are in your mind the three major issues that are currently facing the people of Keppel?
So I think that there's probably 5.
Okay, that's fine.
And these are my 5 priorities for the election. Jobs, we still, even though we've got a low unemployment rate, a very low unemployment rate, I think it's still important to grow our economy and to grow the number of jobs locally. Especially one of my passions is making sure that children who are growing up here have the opportunity to get a good, secure job, get a good education and stay here. And that's really important to me. Housing, we mentioned before, our healthcare and our health system. Education in our schools is incredibly important, and I think 2/5 our roads.
Very good. That was a nice short answer. Great. I guess we'll cover a few of those in the further discussion, but that's probably good just to hear what you feel like when you're talking to people. Those key issues are. I guess that leads into something like cost of living, which I guess what's your government doing, or what have you planning to do to sort of help alleviate cost of living?
Yeah, for sure. This is a big one for local people. We've had those interest rate rises by the Reserve Bank. Cost of living is really hurting people. We have just rolled out the $1,000 electricity rebate for every Queensland household. I've been calling constituents, even just last night I spoke to 50 people on the phones just from the electoral roll about the $1,000 electricity rebate, and people are telling me, I spoke to an elderly man, he said, well, that's great. I received mine a couple of weeks ago and it was great because I felt like I could turn the heater on when it was cold. That is really, really important to people. The 20% off the vehicle registration is also rolling out currently, so 20% off registration for all motor vehicles, trailers and motorbikes, and that's no matter how many you have in your home. That is applied to all registration renewals after the 16th of August, so people are starting to see that relief come through too. The 50-cent public transport fares on our bus network. Not everyone catches the bus, I understand that, but there are plenty of people who do, and the people I've spoken to who do catch the bus, it's making a big difference to have 50-cent fares on our buses. We've run the $200 fair play vouchers that we're giving out to all Queensland children between the age of 5 and 17 to help them get involved in sport and recreation. We know that the cost of sport and rec is growing, and if you've got a couple of children and they all play sport, I know that it can all add up. So having those $200 vouchers available now to all Queensland children, it used to be means tested, now it's available to everyone. So they're just some of the cost of living relief measures that we're implementing. Even free TAFE is a really important one too. 90 TAFE courses are now available through CQU TAFE that are completely free, including the Diploma of Nursing, so that we can actually increase the number of nurses in our healthcare system. And free kindy is something that I'm talking to a lot of parents about as well. I'm going to open the new C&K childcare centre in Parkhurst tomorrow, and the people who are receiving free kindy, the parents are telling me it's really helping with their cost of living.
Interesting. I think it's from an outward perspective, sometimes it's easy to look at some of those measures that are I won't say all, but a lot of government revenue comes from from individual taxpayers in that sense. What do you think, is there anything else that you think you could dive into there in terms of things that your government is trying to achieve that isn't just sort of giving a voucher, $200 fair play voucher is great, but it sort of feels like it's coming from taxpayer money, if that makes sense. So is there anything else diving into the weeds a little bit, maybe, that policy-wise or that, I don't think the government's here to solve all of our problems, don't get me wrong. I just think if there is any other proactive things that you believe you can do to actually help the community.
For sure. It's one of the reasons why we changed the coal royalty framework in Queensland, to make sure that, those resources are Queenslanders, and making sure that the coal companies, the resource companies that are making billions of dollars in profit, particularly over the last few years as the price of coal has surged, making sure that we get our fair share of those royalties and that we inject them back into our local communities. We wouldn't have been able to do any of those cost of living measures that I just mentioned without changing the royalties to coal companies, and we're making those multinational companies pay their fair share. So that's about the resources that we as Queenslanders have coming back into the pockets of Queenslanders. But also I should mention that the cost of living measures that I mentioned are also deflationary as well. We're in a high inflation environment. The Reserve Bank continues to put up interest rates because of inflation, and they're trying to use that lever to try and bring inflation down. We don't want to do anything as a government in Queensland to add to that inflation pressure. So all of those measures that I mentioned are all deflationary measures that government can implement without actually adding to an inflation problem.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Thanks for letting me clarify that a little bit. So I guess it was probably more relevant a little bit earlier, but touching on, your role as an MP, I think a lot of people probably don't understand how Parliament even works, but just touching on something that's sort of relevant to our area, would you mind explaining the difference between a conscience vote and crossing the floor?
Yeah.
Because different parties have policies on things.
They do. As a member of the Labor Party, I'm a member of the Labor caucus. We meet and we discuss legislation, we discuss policies, and we decide as a group how we're going to vote on particular issues. As a party, our rules allow for conscience votes on issues like termination of pregnancy and voluntary assisted dying. So they're votes where on the floor of Parliament you don't vote as a group necessarily, you vote based on how you personally view that issue. And we've only had, I think it's probably been about 3 or 4 of them in the time that I've been elected. One on termination of pregnancy, another one on voluntary assisted dying, and the other one was on MS two-step, but I don't actually think we had a conscience vote on that one. So it's probably only twice that we've actually had a conscience vote on the floor of Parliament since I was elected.
Sure. Do you think that it would be unreasonable for voters to want more freedom for a candidate to express their views that are relevant to their region, rather than feeling like with a lot of voters in the southeast, a lot of money in the southeast, a lot everything sort of regionally we tend to feel a little bit missed out sometimes and not heard, and all the things that we talk about. But where do you think, and I guess I'm not trying to get you in trouble here, but I guess would it be unreasonable for voters to feel like they would want their candidates to have more freedom in that area?
Look, there are independent candidates. We have one in the Parliament currently, the member for Noosa, Sandy Bolton, is an independent. Look, she makes her decision on how she votes based on her own feeling about her own electorate. To be honest, I haven't had any situation with legislation that's been before the Parliament that I haven't felt like as a party we have really discussed and debated it amongst ourselves. And regional members like me in our caucus are we speak very passionately about any impact on our regional communities. And our Brisbane members, I think they get sick of hearing about the importance of regional Queensland, but that's our job. Is to advocate for our communities. So I feel like I've always had that space and determination to make our voices heard in our caucus meetings. That's
good. Okay. I think that's just an important clarification to make sometimes, because, no one likes the feeling of thinking that there's someone, at the top of the party somewhere making decisions for us. When we have elected members who are we want to represent that. That's all.
Yeah, I think our government, I believe, is a government that is very proud of the fact that we are one state, that we are all in this together. You know, we all there's a bit of, you know, argy-bargy sometimes between, you know, the bush and the city, but by and large, especially we see this parochialism during State of Origin weeks, that, you know, we are all Maroon and that we all band in together. And I love seeing it even, you know, particularly during natural disasters where, you know, the rural fire brigades from other parts of the state will come and help our brigade, and then our brigade goes and helps elsewhere. I think that there is a strong belief that our state is better when we're together, that we support each other and that we invest in our regional communities as well.
Okay, thanks for being transparent, open, honest. Here's a tricky one for you. So within Labor and the LNP, there seems to be what I would call factions, and sometimes there's all these fancy, crazy labels that get put on people and candidates and things like that. And, you know, we would say leaning a little more left or a little more right, a little more progressive, a little more conservative. You know, it's probably good we all sit down one day and actually decide what these terms even mean. But where would you say you land in terms of the party, in terms of the Labor Party? Where would you put yourself on that spectrum? Is probably the wrong word as well, but there it is. It's out there.
Look, I'm a member of the left of the Labor Party, and I have been since, you know, before I was elected to Parliament. I am a first-generation Labor Party member, so I'm the only one in my family that's a member of the party and of any political party. And in fact, my parents probably both come from National Party and Liberal Party kind of, so I'm like the black sheep. But I didn't join the Labor Party because, you know, of any family connection or any sort of rite of passage that I had to go through. I joined the party because I wanted to make a difference, and also I wanted to change it. And I truly believe that since I've joined, I've seen so much change in the party, the way that we operate, the policies that we stand for, but still really those core values at the heart of it, standing up for working people, fighting for safe workplaces, they're all still core values that we have, but there has been a lot of change over the years too.
Okay. Let's talk about this. So the LNP have said that they won't change our current laws on abortion, and they've left it a little bit unclear as well. Do you think that they should clarify their position on that?
Yes, absolutely. This is an issue that's actually very important to people in this community and right across the state. We decriminalised termination of pregnancy a few years ago now, so it was in the criminal code that termination of pregnancy was a criminal offence, and we've decriminalised it. We've set the framework out so that people can, as much as possible, get access to safe, legal abortions in Queensland. I do believe that we have candidates in this election in the seat of Keppel that are not coming clean about the fact that they do not support these laws. It's important for people to know their position on this. And, you know, I'm very clear and open about my position. They need to be as well. Yeah,
I guess on policy, whatever it is, then it's ideal that candidates, or if the party hasn't, that the candidates clarify their position on it. I guess that's maybe what voters deserve in that sense.
Absolutely, especially women. I don't want to see the laws go backwards. And whilst the LNP are saying they're not going to change the laws, if they have elected members of Parliament who don't want these laws in place, they will change them. And that's at risk at this election.
Okay, well, we'll be asking all candidates about that, so we'll hear what they have to say. So let's talk about family. What do you think makes a strong family within a community? And then obviously the government, what do you think their actual role is in supporting that? Because like I said earlier, I don't believe the government is there to solve all our problems, but they're there to support a healthy community. So what do you think that actually looks like, a healthy family?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am a big believer in the importance of a good start to life, a good quality early childhood. And we know that, the first 5 years are so incredibly important to a child's life that if things don't go well in that first 5 years, that the trajectory is really, really tough for that child. And I've seen it firsthand with my own daughter. She's turning 7 next month, and the importance of those early years has been really, really critical. Mem Fox talks about, 1,000 books by the time that they turn 3. All of these things are really, really critical to helping children live happy and healthy lives. So I have, especially when I was Assistant Minister for Education, spent a lot of time focusing on the early years, that early childhood education, having accessible daycare and early childhood education to people in the community. Free kindy was something that I remember sitting in the Minister for Education's office about 8 years ago, and I said, why don't we do free kindy? And now it's actually a reality. So I'm pleased to have been part of decisions that affect children and their families in that respect. Our schools are so important to families as well. I talk about schools being like the beating heart of our communities. The job that teachers do is so incredibly important, but our parents also need support too. And that's why we're doing things like expanding the midwifery group practice so that midwives and nurses visit women after they've given birth in an ongoing way in their home to make sure that they're doing okay. There's things like free kindy. We've made PrEP, compulsory. We're seeing really good results with respect of some of the changes that we've made over the years, but giving kids every opportunity to have a great start is, I think, absolutely paramount to the future of our community.
Okay. Yeah, strong families means a strong community. So, yeah, that's good to hear from you on that.
Yep, absolutely. And it takes a village, right? Like, it's not necessarily just that family unit. It's the neighbours, it's the aunties, it's the elders in our community, it's leaders, it's schools. Everyone plays a role, and I think, well, to be honest, I think that we've got a great community here and that it's a great place to grow up. The gap that we need to fill is providing those opportunities for children when they've finished school to get a great education here and stay working here and living here and raising their own family.
That's good. So what do you think that, if we're talking about health, and I just saw that the Premier Stephen Miles has announced a satellite hospital for Rockhampton?
Yes.
Yeah, so can we talk about that? And I guess what are the issues, like the health system, people like to, could use big words like, it's in a disarray or there's all these problems and all this stuff. Like, what are the real issues there, do you think? And then what might be what's your government trying to do to solve those? Yeah,
sure. So health is one of those areas that's really been impacted by that interstate migration. The new Queenslanders who have moved here, really adding a lot of pressure to our hospital and health services, as well as that transient tourism population as well. But I really do believe that the federal Morrison, the LNP government, really neglected Medicare over the years, which saw doctors and GPs having to decide to turn off bulk billing services, and that in turn has put pressure on our emergency departments because people they certainly weren't able to get to their GP because they couldn't afford it. And I've been in this position, when I was a uni student, I was sick. We had a bulk billing doctor at uni, and it was only because it was 100% bulk billing that I would have gone to see the GP because I wouldn't have otherwise been able to afford it. When they turned off bulk billing, it really meant that a lot of people who were sick, who had chronic illness, they weren't getting the GP appointments that they needed, and so their conditions are snowballing and they end up in the emergency department. That pressure on our emergency department is quite significant. Like a few years ago, the cost to the taxpayer for an emergency department presentation was about $1,500. If you compare that to the cost of a bulk billed GP appointment to Medicare, it's much better sense to invest in our primary healthcare network to provide that support and that healthcare before it ends up as people end up in the emergency department. So easing that congestion in the ED is really critical. turning on bulk billing again, which the federal Labor government has done by tripling the bulk billing incentive, has meant that doctors are now they're doing more bulk billing than they were a couple of years ago. They turned off bulk billing even to the point where pensioners, healthcare card concession holders, those people weren't even able to get bulk billed. So, when you've got no money and you can't afford to go to see the doctor, you go to the emergency department, and that costs us more. So I'm really pleased that more GPs are bulk billing again. We're attracting more GPs to the area as well. But also we've opened things like the Medicare Urgent Care Clinic in Rocky. I mean, it's in the old Mandalay building there downstairs at Stockland. And, it was only late last year that Mandalay announced that they were closing. It was the only 100% bulk billing GP service in central Queensland. So that was devastating. We worked together with the federal government and saved it. It's now called the Rockhampton Central Medical Centre, and you can still be 100% bulk billed there. But we've also opened the Urgent Care Clinic, which is open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m, 7 days a week. There's doctors and nurses there, and it's a walk-in service where if you've got a fracture or a wound or need to see a doctor, but instead of going to the emergency department, you can walk in there, get an x-ray. It's all free, all fully bulk billed, and that is helping ease congestion on our ED. But also the satellite hospital is another arm of this as well, which it will be open 8 a.m. till 10 p.m, 7 days a week. It too will have a minor injury and illness clinic as part of it, where those wounds, fractures, illnesses can be treated by a doctor at that satellite hospital. But what I'm really excited about too is that it will have other services in that hospital, which we will still consult with the community about as to which services. The satellite hospitals in southeast Queensland, the 7 of them that exist, they have things like renal dialysis, chemotherapy, mental health, elderly persons healthcare. We can have that conversation as a community about what sorts of services we'd like to see additional in that satellite hospital for Central Queensland too.
Do you think that if they're already struggling with staff, like how is the satellite hospital straight away going to be, find staff if we're already struggling to fill the current positions that exist? Mm-hmm. And then what's the real timeline on that? Is that like a 1-year thing? Is it a 5-year thing? Like how long does that take to actually sort of achieve?
Sure. So a couple of things there. One is the satellite hospitals in southeast Queensland have had no drama whatsoever recruiting staff. They had over 1,000 expressions of interest from healthcare workers at the Bribie Island Satellite Hospital for 400 positions. So I know that we're not southeast Queensland though, so we're a bit different up here, and it is more difficult to attract healthcare workers. But things like our workforce attraction incentive scheme are working. This is a scheme where doctors, nurses, healthcare providers can get access to a cash lump sum incentive, so up to $70,000 for a doctor and $20,000 for a nurse, and then other healthcare providers as well are included, like Allied Health. And we've had thousands of expressions of interest from doctors, nurses, specialists from right across the world, but also interstate. And we've just hit the 1,300 mark of 1,300 additional doctors, nurses and healthcare workers who are coming to work in regional, rural and remote Queensland and working in our hospitals. And that scheme is purely and simply only available to regional Queensland. So I believe that we can staff a satellite hospital. Also, I think it's important to note that Queensland health nurses are the best paid in the country. That's something that we're very proud of. We also have ratios. We also have aged care ratios. We've legislated that. Not every state has nurse-to-patient ratios where those ratios actually make a safer working environment that nurses want to work in. So I'm confident that we'll be able to find staff for our satellite hospital. Okay.
And what about a timeline? Like how long has it taken to build other satellite hospitals?
Yeah, good question. Look, I think this is an election commitment, so let's be clear about that this is something that we'll deliver if we're re-elected to government, and it's not something that the LNP have actually matched as a commitment. So only Labor will deliver a satellite hospital for Rocky. We have to find a site first. There are numerous options of state-owned land in and around Rocky, so I've got a fair idea about where it could go, but let's face this election first, then let's start the discussion about where it would go. I do believe North Rocky is probably the best area with connectivity, as it has to be accessible. But, we've got the model for satellite hospitals. We've delivered 7, and I'm confident that we can do 1 in Rocky pretty quickly.
I would probably say most people don't care enough about politics generally, but obviously coming into an election, that's when people's ears prick up, but it also tends to be when these election promises are made. I guess, how do you sort of think about an election promise versus the reality of you've been in government for a while, there's been a state government for a couple of years, 8 years, I believe, at this point, why are they promising a hospital now? Obviously there's pressure building in the issue, but, I would defend yourselves by making an election promise now by saying people don't care about stuff until it's an election. But how do you sort of balance that out?
Yeah, look, I completely understand. I'm not from a political family, so before I got into politics, I too was sceptical about elections, and I too was I talk to people and they say I haven't decided who I'm voting for yet. I usually make my mind up in the weeks before. I was pretty much the same as well before I got into this. So I understand people's scepticism, and also everyone's got a lot going on in their lives, but I do take very seriously the importance of delivering on your election commitments, because that is where people need to see that integrity of the commitments that you make. The satellite hospital is something that we're committing to this election, but in the last 4 years, we've been busy delivering a brand new mental health unit at the Rocky Hospital. We've delivered the 42-bed detox and rehab centre for Rocky, where people now are getting support for alcohol and other drug support that they didn't have before. We've been delivering the renal dialysis unit at the Capricorn Coast Hospital, eight new chairs going in there at a cost of $14 million. The cardiac hybrid theatre at the Rocky Hospital, so people who have heart conditions that need stents, they normally have to go to Brisbane currently, they will be able to get that at the Rocky Hospital. Delivering quality healthcare closer to home is something I'm incredibly passionate about. My grandmother had cancer. She was in Gladstone. When I was at uni, I used to pick her. She used to have to fly to Brisbane to get chemotherapy because we didn't have a chemotherapy service here in central Queensland. So I saw firsthand how hard it was for her to travel to get cancer treatment. And astonishingly, back then, 40% of people in this region who were diagnosed with cancer chose not to get treatment because of the challenge of travelling to get that treatment. Now we've got a cancer care unit, but that really ingrained in me the importance of having quality healthcare closer to home and limiting the number of trips that we have to make away to get access to that quality treatment.
So people have a short memory, that's what you're saying?
Look, I get that... what I delivered in 2015 is not something that necessarily people are thinking about on the top of their minds.
Sure.
But each election offers an opportunity for parties and candidates to put forward what they're going to do. It's a contest of ideas, and this is something that I've worked really hard on in terms of this satellite hospital. I've seen how well that they work in South East Queensland. Over 160,000 Queenslanders have received treatment at those satellite hospitals, and we've seen in some cases a 26% decrease in the non-urgent presentations to the emergency departments at their nearby hospitals. So easing that congestion on our emergency department is what these satellite hospitals are very good at doing.
All right. Very good. I guess we can touch on some other sort of more relevant things, like we've noted here discussing the Premier's announcement around state-owned petrol stations to regulate fuel prices and things like that. I guess my question in thinking about that is, the state's moving towards a net zero target. Why would they put taxpayer money into a fossil fuel sort of industry and potentially compete with other small businesses? To me, it just doesn't quite line up. So I just thought I'd see what your thoughts were about it.
Queensland uses a lot more fuel than anywhere else in the country. We're the most decentralised state, where our roads and petrol are pretty important to us, and yet we have the least amount of competition and we have higher prices than anywhere else in the country. So when we talk about the cost of living, petrol absolutely is one of the top things that people spend their money on each week, and particularly in regional Queensland. And when we don't have the competition that's driving down those prices, let's try something different. And state-owned petrol stations, there's going to be 12 of them across the state. I'll be arguing heavily for one to be in our region. But also as part of this measure, we are capping fuel increases by 5 cents each day, and only allowing one increase per day, so that petrol stations can't just, throw the price up as they see fit multiple times a day, and, with no cap on how high they increase. So this will help regulate, but also offer some competition in the market.
Okay. Would it be, I'm just trying to get in the head of like legislation, people making those policy decisions. Is it the same as regulating how quickly you can put up your rent, for example? Yeah. That, fuels, it's a smaller cost in that sense. It's $1 something for fuel when rent's a dollar value. But is it with the sort of the same approach, I guess, in trying to do that?
Yeah, that's right. So where the market is, the supply and demand, especially with petrol, there's international things at play as well, which determine prices. But there's also, this is something that the Competition Consumer Commission has been looking at for years in regional Queensland in particular, why we're paying more at the Bowser than we should. And so the government is looking at ways in which we can help Queenslanders with their household bills, and fuel is definitely one of them. Having said that, we're also looking at investing in biofuels petrol stations as well. There's going to be, a lot of variety in the market soon when it comes to the different types of fuels available. We're seeing hydrogen, a real growth in hydrogen. I had a really interesting meeting recently about sustainable aviation fuels as well, and the way in which we're using sustainable aviation fuel products to grow in Queensland that then we can use to make aviation fuel. All of these different ways that, technology is changing, but ways in which we can make it easier on Queenslanders is our number one focus. Okay.
And I guess to close that loop then, is that more of a short-term cost of living relief approach then? Because like I said, the long-term view is to move away from, to move towards electric cars and away from fossil fuels and usage of those. So, is that more of a short-term view, look at things then to address that cost of living and then moving more towards those other things in the future?
Yeah, look, we're investing in charging stations right across the state as well for electric vehicles. The ownership numbers of electric vehicles in Queensland is growing quite rapidly, I think almost exponentially. So we need to make sure that there's charging stations available. And, I remember when Stockland put their charging stations in under Stockland in Rocky there, and I thought, it'll be interesting to see how much that gets used. Now they're full every time I drive past. So it is a growing area. I don't yet drive an electric vehicle. Because of the number of Ks that I do each day, I'm not sure about the range yet, but I think, the number of people who own one now compared to 10 years ago there's Teslas everywhere, especially in Yeppoon.
Yeah, sure. I guess straight away I just had heard, I guess, the perplexing nature of that sense. It seems a bit contradictory, but I guess if you've got good reasons to do it in the short term and then those other policies are long term, then that makes sense if that's what you're deciding to do. But yeah, that's good. So one of the things that I think is worth discussing with candidates is Great Keppel Island. Mm-hmm. So that's something that you've sort of talked about a lot. And I guess the big hot button issue is this, exclusive native title claim on it. And I think, it's people have a lot of questions around that. So you're right to talk about that and give your view on that, or what's sort of happening with Great Keppel Island.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to. One of my favourite topics. Great Keppel Island, has been challenging over the years. We had Tower Holdings had the lease, multiple leases, multiple hundred hectares of leases on the island. They were given a 99-year lease by the former Newman LNP government. There were conditions of that lease that they hadn't been meeting, and they went through the EIS process. They closed the old resort. They did a lot of damage over there, and it was good last year to, be able to be part of the government that acted and rescinded those leases from Tower Holdings. So now all of those leases are back in state government hands, in public hands. We developed a master plan, a community-led master plan for the future of the island, and that was something I was very proud of, because up until then we had sort of had this revolving door of developers over the years with their grand plans that they'd sort of lob in, tell everyone their plans, try and get the state government to invest in and give them funding for their things, and then they'd walk away because it wasn't feasible. I did think that when Gina Reinhardt got involved that something might happen. But then when she pulled out, I thought, well, I don't know how this could ever happen. So developing our own state-led master plan by the Department of State Development, and then in collaboration, we had about 50 local people on the working group through the time that we developed that master plan. It was amazing to see people who have such different views about the island coming together and actually coming up with a combined unified vision for the future, and then being able to develop this master plan, which I was really pleased to release earlier in the year. We have $30 million of state government funding that's allocated to improvements on the island. And there's been a lot of different views over the years about what that should be spent on. The master plan identified access and infrastructure, like the sewage treatment plant, as being two of the top priorities for the master plan. We have just signed an agreement with Livingston Shire Council to deliver a brand new sewage treatment plant for the island. The old one over there it's very old and it needs upgrading. And so council is going to deliver that new sewage treatment plant with the state government funding. We're also developing and there's some information sessions in Yeppoon tomorrow for people to come and see what is planned for what they call the Gateway Plaza or the Arrival Plaza. So where people hop off the boat and around that hideaway area where people sort of come up off the boat, and what we can do to improve that space to make it a bit more welcoming, maps, information, more directional signage around the place, pathways, toilets, amenities, make it a more public-friendly place, especially for day trippers. So there's lots happening, but I'm very pleased to be working closely with the council and also with all the operators on the island, and also Capricorn Enterprise too.
Yeah, good. That is exciting. I guess the question looming that seems to not really be clear is, and the grey area that around the native title, and yeah, no, that's okay. Just and it's just that people get worried when they see a word something like exclusive. So I guess it'd be great to clarify that.
Sure. The Woppa people are the traditional owners of Great Keppel Island, or Woppa as they know it, and they have made an application. Some Woppa people have made an application for native title over Great Keppel, or Woppa, and that application has been submitted to the federal court, the Native Title Tribunal. This is all governed by federal legislation, and it's very, very early in the process. So they've submitted their application. There's community consultation that would still need to be undertaken, and this is not going to happen anytime soon. And we also don't know whether or not a court or a tribunal would award native title over this land. So this is a space that is outside of my jurisdiction as a state MP. This is something that will be determined by the federal court, but also the Woppa people have great vision for the island, and we have really enjoyed working as a working group for the master plan with the Woppa elders and with local Woppa people. Coming together and hearing their stories about what they'd like to see is for the future of the island. I think people need not to be afraid. Other political parties are very good at making people fearful about working with our local traditional owners. I think it's important to embrace and to hear their view and their ideas. And I doubt that the candidates who are spinning this kind of stuff have actually ever sat down with a Woppa elder and talked to them about what their ideas are for the future of the island.
All right. Thanks for clarifying that. Appreciate it. Look,
I might just add too,
no,
Levi,
you're right.
too, sorry, that on the mainland here we have the Durrumbal people who are the native title holders. They were awarded native title over, pretty much all of Rocky, the Cap Coast in 2016, and then native title claim B was awarded in 2018. So we're right now on native title determined land, and it hasn't made any difference to the way that we live our lives. It's made a huge difference to the Durrumbal people who are able to work with community, with government agencies. They do a lot of work with defence around the Shoalwater Bay area. And I think that that's important. So people need not be fearful about a native title claim. We've had native title determined here for 8 years now. And I don't think anyone could say that it's made a terrible difference to their life.
Sure. Sorry to clarify it on that one, but do you know if it was it was delivered or given under exclusive use? Is it under the same conditions, or is it different? I just don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. There are parts of it where there are exclusive use and that bundle of rights that native title provides. So traditional fishing and hunting, all of that is determined by the federal court. It is a very long process. The Durrumbal people started that process where they lodged their application, I think, about 30 years prior, so almost 40 years ago, and it was only awarded in 2018. There's a lot of work that has to go into, applicants proving their claim and that continuity of connection to land. It's very complex native title law, but it is federal law, and there is a tribunal that decides this.
Okay. Well, Brittany, I really appreciate you answering all my questions and taking the time to do that. I hope you've enjoyed the opportunity to, elaborate on a bunch of these different issues and things.
Sure. I have really enjoyed it. Thank you, Levi. Thank you for the opportunity. I think I probably could have spoken on a lot of these things for a lot longer, so we could probably talk all day. It's what I love doing. It's my life, and, I'm looking forward to this election as being a good contest of ideas for the future of our region.
Yeah, look, just tried to pick some sort of nice hot button topics that are, sort of getting battled out in the public domain at the moment. But I guess trying to think of a way to finish it for people, what would you say to someone who, you're going to probably be at a polling booth in a few weeks' time, handing out a how to vote card for the Labor Party? What are you going to say to someone who sort of, a lot of people don't decide until polling day who they're going to vote for, or pre-polling, or whatever that sort of time period. So what would you say to someone? You're handing them a card. What are you going to say?
I grew up here. I love living here. I'm raising my family here now. I'm proud to have delivered things like the $120 million Yeppoon Rocky Road upgrade, that 42-bed detox and rehab centre, over $20 million of upgrades at Yeppoon State High School. But my job's not done, and I need your support this election to continue my work and finish what I started.
Thanks very much, Brittany.
Thank you.